After just 7 days, 96% of Shiseido Benefiance Wrinkle Smoothing Eye Cream users saw reduced wrinkles and diminished dark circles. Shop now at Sephora and discover how change can happen in the blink of an eye. Consumer tested by 110 women.
If you thought goldenly breaded McDonald's chicken couldn't get more golden, think Golder, because new sweet and smoky special edition gold sauce is here. Made for your chicken favorites. At participating McDonald's for a limited time.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku, and it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Chris Holmes, and this is Burned by Books. Here you'll find interviews with writers you already love, like Jennifer Egan and Rebecca Mackay, mixed in with up-and-coming voices like Alexandra Kleeman and Rumaan Alam. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts, but check out previous episodes at burnedbybooks.com and on Instagram and Twitter at burnedbybooks. Let's start the show. In the world of Yiming Ma's These Memories Do Not Belong to Us, our narrator has just received an illicit inheritance from his mother. That inheritance consists of a series of shared memories stored in a technology called a mind bank, which allows the user to inhabit the memories of others in a complete and visceral way. That bank of memories, however, proves to be the ultimate tool for the single global superpower of the novel, the Qin nation, formerly China, which rules as a single-party monolith with endless powers of surveillance and discipline. Woven into the narrative of the Qin future are memories that dive into the past and take us to America, Japan, and elsewhere in the pre-global World War world, inviting us to live inside the experiences and feelings of immigrants, a sumo wrestler and a couple living through the Cultural Revolution, a watch seller and his protege, plague survivors, and many others. Each memory stands against some element of state suppression and control, while also working the magic of narrative in offering up the interiority of someone we will never meet, but whose consciousness feels powerfully familiar. A speculative fiction that dazzles with its vision of a technologically driven future world, These Memories Do Not Belong to Us is at its heart about the quieter miracles of human connection, community, and resistance against sometimes insurmountable odds. Yiming Ma holds an MBA from Stanford and an MFA from Warren Wilson College, where he was the Carol Houck Smith Scholar. His stories and essays appear in the New York Times, The Guardian, the Florida Review, and elsewhere. Born in Shanghai, he now lives in Toronto, New York, and Seattle. Welcome to Burned by Books, Yiming Ma.
Thanks for having me.
I wonder if you'd start us out by just reading the very beginning of These Memories Do Not Belong to Us, which introduces us to the world of the Qin nation and also to the idea of the memory bank.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. These memories do not belong to us. When I was a boy, my mother used to tell me stories of a world before memories could be shared between strangers. Although all the stories took place long before she had been born, it was easy to believe that she had witnessed them firsthand. Her lips would tremble, her voice rising with excitement. Wistfully, she would describe a time when our ancestors shared their thoughts using nothing more than words, such a primitive tool to allow others to experience their most vivid personal memories. Some of the memory epics from which she drew her stories must have been censored already by the party. Any loyal patriot would have deleted these memories. For instance, the tale of an armless swimmer during the Cultural Revolution, when citizens still raised children with disabilities, or the meta-creational epic revolving around the incineration of Ruben, a military campaign that our youth no longer study. Why keep any of them, if they might put us at risk of the party's wrath? Had one of our neighbors reported us, our family's entire collection of memories might have been confiscated, and not only the ones we should have known to hide. Since I was a child, I accepted that my mother was not an ordinary woman, not least because of her choice to raise me alone. Late in life, she decided that she wanted to be a mother, and she had refused to allow the absence of a suitable partner or the downgrading of her social credit score to stop her. I had always thought that one Chin proverb epitomized her fearlessness. Even if the sky collapsed, she would use it as a blanket to warm her body. So why would the memories stored in such a woman's mind bank be any less remarkable? Since the devices are directly installed into the hippocampi of our brains, I like to think of our mind bank as simply the extension of our mind. Still, my mother was careful never to send any sensitive memories to my mind bank to avoid unwanted attention. Now that I reflect on that precious time together, perhaps that was why she told me all those stories via voice in the privacy of our bedrooms, back when we were permitted to stop our mind banks from logging data at home and away from any neighbors who lived in our tower. All my life, my mother had tried to protect me, so why would she risk everything by leaving me such a dangerous inheritance?
Thank you so much. That was so nice to hear you read it. And I wonder if you'd give us a little gloss of where the world stands geopolitically and culturally in the present of the novel.
Yeah, so at the beginning of the novel, a moon millennia has already passed since this war in which the Qin Empire has taken over. And I guess where it stands today, the Qin Empire is a reimagined China. And around sometime in the past, they had invented this technology known as mind banks, which allows people to share memories and therefore actually allowed their military capabilities to also improve exponentially. And so in this world, they took over the West and America became a colony known as Chin America. And kind of different elements of culture that were in China actually kind of evolved as well. So for instance, the standardized exam known as the Gaokao became a test of resilience that people in other countries also took, but potentially with disadvantages. And in the present, mind banks become something that citizens use not only, that the country uses not only for military capabilities, but it becomes a consumer product as well, where citizens use it for entertainment, for communication, for education, and kind of permeates every aspect of society and also allows the party to actually surveil their memories as well in case of resistance.
So the idea of a mind bank, a place for storing memories, seems both deeply science fictional, but also frighteningly close to a contemporary reality. Why were you interested in thinking through the repercussions of a world where memories are stored like data? And is it something that felt like you were edging up to in the world outside the novel?
Yeah, to give some context, when I started These Memories Do Not Belong to Us, the world was very different, right? It was actually during the first days of the COVID-19 pandemic in early 2020, when the virus was still kind of news from Wuhan. And as the world shut down, I kind of became obsessed with memory as this great equalizer, right? That when everything else was stripped away, that at least we all had our past that we could reflect on, whether we were rich or poor or, anything else. But I think I had this chilling thought that I couldn't get rid of. And that thought was, what if even our memories were no longer safe? And that created ultimately the container in which I was able to explore all these stories written in different styles, set before the war that the Qin Empire takes over, right afterwards when the racial hierarchy kind of flips, and then in the future as well when it becomes a way of life and surveillance.
So there have been comparisons made between your novel and David Mitchell's Cloud Atlas.
Yeah.
Both treat time in a non-linear fashion in order to tell stories that feel at first as though they are worlds apart, but which end up dovetailing in unexpected ways. First, is this a comparison that you welcome? And second, how did you treat the time periods in the novel as something that you would need to map out for the reader so that they could stay with you while being essentially jerked back and forth across a universe of time?
Yeah, I consider it an honor to be compared to works by David Mitchell, such as Cloud Atlas and Ghost Written and others. I think another inspiration for the novel was Olga Tokarczuk's Flights, which was the first time I had heard anyone describe the term constellation novel. And I think that was something that gave me permission in a way. Oga's incredible novel has 116 different narratives spread out across time and style and, revolve around travel, but in really surprising ways. And I think, seeing the works of amazing authors like Mitchell, Takarsik, Sequoia Nagamatsu, and others, I felt like I had the permission to explore this structure of memories
Mm.
within my book. And the process of actually figuring it out in terms of the order, that took a lot of time to get right. I think there were the
I
craft
bet.
element. Yeah. I think there are the craft elements of figuring out, how to build the world slowly in the mind of the reader who is new to it. So, for instance, in general, more of the stories that are before the war or right after war, they tend to appear a little bit earlier, while the more speculative stories appear later. But a lot of the times I was listening to the voice. I was listening to the voice of the 11 memories that are inherited, that are illicit, and listening to how they change over time, the rhythm of them, and as much as what they were actually saying, even as I was hoping that what was being revealed in each memory would build upon one another in surprising ways. The other aspect of it is actually in the opening, I invite the reader to read these memories in whatever order they so choose to reclaim that authority, which is fairly uncommon when reading a book.
Yeah.
So, as much work as I did creating the order, I also thought it was important to give the reader that option. And I felt in some ways I was reclaiming my authority because I think the reader actually has that freedom, right? Every reader has that freedom whenever reading a book, whether a story collection or a novel. And I was really, really curious what percentage of my readers would actually take on that freedom.
I'm not sure. Has it officially been published yet? Yes, it's out now.
Yeah, yeah. Today I'm starting my tour at the Center for Fiction in the US, but we launched it in Canada just over 2 weeks ago. And yeah, I've been really, really excited and by the reception. And
Have you heard
I hope it
anybody?
finds its readers, right?
Have you found anybody that is reading it out of turn?
Yeah, actually I have, but I will say that the majority of readers do read it in the order. And I think there's a delight at the end when they realize that that was honestly the hypothesis that I saw
Mm.
when I when I constructed the book. But occasionally I have received notes of folks who have read it out of order. And I've also received wonderful notes of folks who have been inspired and used it as inspiration to act and to make changes in their lives and try to improve the world in some ways that perhaps I'm not even brave enough to explore.
Mm. I love that. That's amazing. The best of what we would hope fiction can do. My favorite story in the novel is the Chankonabe story,
Mm.
in part because it seems at first innocuous. A young sumo wrestler in Japan, before it is incinerated entirely in the global war, trains at a stable and remembers his mother's chankonabe soup that allowed him to gain the weight he needed to compete. There is the return of the boy to his mother after loneliness and not matching up to his expectations in the stable of wrestlers. But I'm very interested in why the Japanese-ness of this story was important to thinking of it as a dissident memory in the world of Qin.
Mm, that's a great question. I'll just share that I think I had a whole life before I started writing. I'm a first generation immigrant. I think I moved between 8 different schools between New York and Shanghai and Toronto. And I didn't write until my mid 20s after I had built this entirely different career in business and tech and actually impact investing in education. And so a lot of the memories were drawn from my experiences living in other countries, working in different jobs. And specifically, Chankanabe, that came out of my time living in Japan. I had an internship actually working at a sake factory.
Oh, cool.
Had an experience, yeah, cutting rice, in the fields, wearing these hazmat suits and just completely boiling inside under a 100-degree heat within those suits as I was cutting and experiencing what farmers go through, even though, of course, they have more advanced technologies now. But during that time, I attended my first grand sumo tournament and then actually returned on a couple different occasions when Japan kind of brought me back for various reasons. And so Chankanabe started there. But I think in many ways, the story there is a microcosm of the whole book. It's a mosaic of sorts in which the actual memory itself is layered, and between recipes by these mantras by the mother as she's these recipes by the mother as she's making chankanabe, and these mantras from the sumo wrestling stable as the young boy and the mother kind of their paths eventually intertwine, and as he goes through the struggle. And I think at the end, this book explores a lot of different things, and the speculative element of memory transfer and the reimagined China taking over the world. All of those are true, and all of those explore themes that are important and especially urgent today, such as authoritarianism or collective memory, resistance. But I think at its heart, and I think and this stems from my own background, most of the stories revolve around the themes of survival and the tension between survival and resistance in many ways. And the young sumo wrestler there and the mother, I think in many ways they're trying to survive as well. There's a reason why the young boy was actually sent to study sumo in the first place. And at the same time, there's a pull against that. And even as they're trying to survive and trying to, get through all the horrors that their lives present to them, I think at the end they have to figure out what to do under these extraordinary, devastating circumstances. And that's a theme that actually resurfaces across many of these stories.
Yeah, it absolutely does.
New Vitamin Water Zero Sugar Pineapple Passion Fruit is packed with vitamins. Just like the amount of peas we packed in that sentence. It's packed like your tote bag. The one you stole from your ex. Or your overpriced half a studio apartment. Or extra rushed rush hour traffic. Packed like your calendar. Triple booked at 5, of course. Grab a vitamin water. Did we mention it's packed with vitamins?
Raise the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an Enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. Start converting your B2B audience today. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started today at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for this day.
I was so tickled to find Akebono, the Yokozuna of the 90s sumo world. He was at the very end of his career when I lived in Japan. I lived there as well, which is fun that we share that. And you bring not only Akebono, but other real figures into your fiction to place us in some way in time and space. And so why do we get those historical figures? There surely be something beyond just a time placement for you. And specifically, why Akebono, the tallest and heaviest of the sumo wrestlers?
Yeah, I think I was very inspired by wrestlers and by people throughout history, and just wanted to pay homage in some ways when I was choosing these characters and their names. I think the same is, I think the placement of these historical figures, as you mentioned, is also important for time. I think as a novel that moves so much between time, I felt it was almost necessary. And yeah, ultimately that's why I made those creative choices.
One of the very contemporary figures that pops up is Kaveh Akbar, a poet and novelist of quite recent fame. His poetry is contraband in Chin. The twin brothers read and talk about his poems in secret. And this connects to a larger question in the novel. What happens to literature if technology allows us to simply exist in the minds of others in seemingly more direct ways. And that, of course, had been the novel's purview since the 18th century, looking into the interiority of others in a way that we always long to do but never can. Does the novel predict a moment where fiction will have less of a role in that enterprise? And what were your own anxieties?
So, as I mentioned, I started writing this novel in early 2020, and that was a period where our main concerns were also survival through the pandemic. And about 2 years later, of course, ChatGPT launched, and we're in this age where there's tremendous innovation and fear and hype around AI, and whether that will ultimately, lead to literature having a lesser role that can be replaced in some different ways. I think this was an anxiety that I had as I was finalizing the book. But the truth is, even before AI, we can see that other medias were taking the role that literature was what was having. I think in the race to attract eyeballs and attention, even Netflix and other media and TikTok and Facebook, all of these things were taking attention that the space that novels previously held.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the same time, what can we do about it, right? I think that lays at the core of one of the other stories as well, in which a young writer during the early phase of the mind bank, where mind banks begin to take all the attention of citizens rather than books. This writer is obsessed with creating something before it's all over. And I think at its core, it's very similar to kind of the survival theme that I mentioned earlier, right? I noticed that you actually wrote a book previously about Kazuo Ishiguro.
Yeah, I did.
And something that, one inspiration that he gave me, one of his interviews about the novel Never Let Me Go, is how much of the book is about resignation, right? About the fact that under such devastating circumstances, the characters, instead of resisting and breaking the system, ultimately decide to make the best of it. And I think a lot of the times in my novel, that's what the characters are doing as well. And I think it's to mimic in some ways what we're seeing today with citizens and especially in the US, governments that are taking away rights, that are deporting migrants, that are doing all these things. And yet for most of us, we're struggling with the fact that we're living in a time of immense economic inequality, of technological uncertainty. And I don't think it's a coincidence that both are happening at the same time.
A novel about a single-party global system of surveillance can not avoid comparisons to Orwell's 1984, a book that looks more prescient by the second. Thought control is, after all, the final frontier of a disciplinary society. How does Orwell figure into these memories do not belong to us? And are we seeing an equally technology-driven surveillance state emerge in China and globally right before our eyes?
So I think one quote from 1984 was always in my head. I was writing this book, which is those who control the present control the past, and those who control the past control the future. And I think in a way, that's why the book moves so much between the past and in some ways this future society. I didn't write this book as a critique of China in any way. I think it was a worry that I had with my editors and publishers. In some ways, I didn't even intend it to be dystopian. I just saw it as people trying to make the best of things under these extraordinary circumstances. But it's impossible, I think, in these days not to think about the US-China tensions and to think about how toxic in some ways the rhetoric has been ever since, Trump's first regime. And I think we're now seeing the byproducts of that, the unintended consequences. I think the race for AI dominance in some ways is driven by the fact that any tech company in San Francisco can say, "Oh, we need to beat China. We need to get ahead of them."
Yeah.
And as a result, the US has been very lax about AI regulation. What is the right amount of AI regulation? I don't have the answer to that right now, but I know that fear of not coming out first because of China and the geopolitical tensions, it's all related.
Yeah, I think that's a really fascinating way to think about it, and certainly seems to be bearing out, especially in the total failure of regulating technology that we just don't understand how it will
Mm,
change the function of our lives, which made me think so much of the memory bank,
mm,
which is something you can imagine in the world of your book began as like a wondrous invention. You can save memories, and maybe those memories are memories of a loved one or something who has passed away, and you can live in their past, as some characters do in your novel. But then you can see it just kind of, spreading its tentacles and becoming more and more involved in the state's desire for power and to use it for military means and surveillance means. And it brings me back to your great point about Never Let Me Go, which is a society can invent a technology that seems, like it will have beneficial effects, and then end up putting people in circumstances where their very lives become disposable. And what do you do once you've become one of those disposable lives? But you reference some things like, for example, China's use of a social credit system,
mm.
and I wonder how kind of contemporary China played into how you imagined this future Qin dynasty.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess for reference, I was born in Shanghai, and although I moved away when I was fairly young, I feel like my life is intrinsically tied to China and the city of Shanghai in particular. When I was 7, I actually returned to China and schooled in the system. And then in the summers, every other summer, I would go back. And so I saw in some ways how Shanghai evolved over the period, and then also interned in Shanghai when I was in university as well and at a consulting firm. So I kind of saw China grow through the lens of Shanghai, and a lot of these things that are mentioned there, a lot of parts of these memories do not belong to us because this reimagined China has become the sole global superpower. These things like the Gaokao and the social credit score are embedded in that society, potentially in different ways. But I think culturally it was important for me. And I think one reason is that is that the mind bank and the speculative element of memory transfer that allowed me to kind of flip the racial hierarchy and envision a world in which the Asian protagonist could be seen through the lens of the majority rather than through the lens of the minority, often in relation to whiteness. I think part of that is that I identify as a first generation immigrant, but also really kind of this 1.5 generation because I lived between Asia and North America. And most of the authors who write in English are Asian American who grew up in the States the whole time. So what they write about is often in relation to identity, in relation to race. And while this novel has a lot of different identities, has Japanese characters, has characters on an island that is not named, it's not really an identity novel, right? They're just characters who are trying to make the best of things. But I wanted these cultural elements, such as the social credit score, such as the Gaokao, unless there was a reason to explain them, I wanted to make it so that the characters knew them intrinsically. And it was the default kind of mindset rather than something that was exoticized or something that had to be explained unless there was a character that needed it to be explained to.
So another one of my favorite stories within is the watch seller and his young protege, and the beautiful relationship that they build, and even as the surrounding world of their moment becomes more and more perilous, including a virus that is threatening much of the world. And there is something about the attention given to the watches, given to the beauty of something that was made by hand by someone with a particular aesthetic vision. And it seemed to be you speaking through the book, almost imploring us to kind of slow down and look at things that are made artistically by people's hands, and to understand the kind of depth of that work. And I wonder if that was something important to you, and and how it played out in crafting that section.
Yeah, it was something that was important to me, and I actually find it fascinating because it's that story, After the Bloom, is one that folks often bring up, and is actually where the chrysanthemum cover of my novel is driven from. But I think I was,
Because it's the chrysanthemum virus, right? Or flu,
exactly.
or yeah.
Yeah. So the funny part is that that was actually the last story that I wrote when I
Oh,
submitted.
fascinating.
Yeah, when I submitted the novel to my agents, there was mention of a chrysanthemum virus because I had started writing a story about a pandemic at the early days of the pandemic, actually, when it was largely in China. And as it started to consume the whole world, it felt too real. And I actually abandoned that story. But because it was mentioned in a number of parts throughout the book as a historical element, my agents asked me, is there a chrysanthemum virus story? And at that moment, something about horology and literature and the virus that I had already imagined in my head as existing in this world, they all came together. And I told them that I knew what I wanted to write. I wanted to write the central story. And it all kind of came together. Watchmaking and horology are interests of mine. I do collect vintage watches from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Very rarely kind of modern ones, although I have a few to deal with rain, mostly because nothing in the past is truly rainproof with time. But during the pandemic, I became embedded in some ways with some different watch communities. And it's very different than the literary communities, I think, even economically and
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
but it's just crazy. I've been to these meetups where, first of all, people hide, like we're not doing it at a coffee shop, we're doing it at someone's office. And then everyone brings like 5 pieces and lays it out on a table, and then you take a photo, and these pieces can be tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes like 5 figures, and yet people just allow other collectors and hobbyists to play with them. And it's just a completely different world and economic system. And I guess in some ways, because I've lived in all these different worlds, having worked in business and tech and been part of the literary world, I love learning how different people tick. People who've grown up in different ways, who work in different industries, and then acting in some ways as that bridge between them. So I was nervous about including so much about horology in there, but in some ways I wanted to provide a bridge as well for people in literature to understand how beautiful that can be, how much craft goes into it. I remember the first time I was at a watch boutique, it was at London Watch Week, and there was a watchmaker who had studied in Switzerland, and she told me that the schooling there, it was like a grad school for 4 years to become a watchmaker, which was longer actually than the UK typical degree. If you go to Cambridge or Oxford, it's 3 years.
Yeah.
So, and then she talked about the sacrifices, the fact that a lot of watchmakers who fix watches actually have astigmatism. They're always looking through a tiny magnifying glass on one eye.
Oh.
And actually, there's a huge shortage of watchmakers today because not enough people, young people, want to train in it. And it's very hard to find someone that you can trust. So you often have to ship your watches to another city or country to get them properly or find the right parts. But I think the complexity of that, the detail-oriented of that is actually the heart of the hobbyists, I think, who are into vintage. And it was a way for me to share that. And I think the obsession that people have there is similar to the obsession that writers have for their art, for their craft. And in some ways, although the money aspects are completely different, I wanted to create that parallel for people and share that love that I have for these pieces.
You and Gary Steingart share this in common. I remember.
I think his collection is worth far more than mine. I think mine are probably about 10% as valuable as his. But yeah, he is the figure in the watch world that he's the main author that everyone knows in the watch world. And I remember there was a Times article recently about him too. So
yeah,
I'm a bit shy about all of this, but I have made wonderful friends, and there are a lot of authors actually who enjoy watches as well on the literary space.
Well, I think you two need to get together. And Yiming, before I let you go, I was wondering if you would share a little bit what you've been reading and loving recently. I know my listeners would love to hear any recommendations that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. I just read Headshot by Rita Bullwinkle, which I thought was absolutely incredible. I think last night I was at a dinner with 3 writers whose books have come out in the last year or two. Ruben Reyes Jr., he just had Archives of Unknown Universes. Then Michelle Norris, her book is When the Harvest Comes. And Aubrey Muscure came out with River East, River West all in the last 2 years. And those are all books that I definitely recommend folks check out. I already mentioned Ishiguro, but Never Let Me Go was an incredible influence. And R.O. Kwon's Exhibit is definitely another book I read recently that I really, really appreciate. So perhaps that's something to get started.
Yeah, I read her first and really liked it. So I'll have to find Exhibit.
Yeah.
And I'm always pleased to hear about the Ishiguro influences, because that's certainly how I feel about him in my own life, writing and thinking and being in a world where we, as you say, so often have to figure out how to just survive. But in thinking about things that are more pleasurable than just surviving, I want to recommend These Memories Do Not Belong to Us by Yiming Ma, a cloud atlas-like journey through times and places, in thinking through whether in just surviving we can find new forms of community and connection and perhaps even resistance. And Yiming, it was a real pleasure to get to talk to you about it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Chris.
And have a great event tonight at the Center for Fiction. I know that I'll be excited to hear about it if it was a great one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, and looking forward to more conversations in the future.
Me too. Well, that's all from me for now. My thanks to Yiming Ma for coming on to talk about his debut novel, These Memories Do Not Belong to Us. You can find links to purchase These Memories Do Not Belong to Us and all of Yiming Ma's recommended books at the website burnedbybooks.com. There you'll find all of our previous episodes, links to buy a podcast t-shirt, and ways to get in contact. As you listen, take a moment to rate the show on iTunes, Spotify, and now YouTube, or wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, this has been Burned by Books.
Ready to be inspired? Welcome to the GoodNet Effect, Echoes of Inspiration, a podcast by GoodNet.